They thought you wouldn't notice. Or maybe they thought you'd break. That you'd lash out, spiral, beg, or fight for their approval. But you didn't. And that was the beginning of their unraveling. Let me ask you this. How often have you watched someone betray your loyalty, and then carry on as if they've won something? How often have you seen people cross the line, pretend nothing happened, and somehow convince others to clap while they lie, manipulate, and distort reality? And maybe you stayed quiet. Maybe you didn't correct the record, didn't retaliate, didn't expose. But here's the thing, you didn't need to. Because now, slowly, clearly, painfully, their whole circle is falling apart. And it's not by your hands. It's by their own. You see, there's a dangerous lie society sells you, that staying silent makes you weak. That if you don't speak up, you'll be forgotten. But what if the opposite is true? What if your quiet dignity is more powerful than any outburst? What if your restraint, your refusal to engage, is the very force that exposes everything they tried to hide? In Stoic relationships, silence isn't surrender, it's a stance. A signal. A decision to let the universe handle what doesn't deserve your energy. And in that decision, something remarkable happens. Truth begins to move. Not in the noise, but in the unraveling. Most people think betrayal is an isolated moment. That it can be hidden, patched, justified. But real betrayal doesn't just affect one relationship. It affects every relationship. It rots character. And character, as every practitioner of Stoicism knows, is destiny. Their betrayal of you wasn't just a one-off failure. It was the crack in the dam. And now, flood's coming. This video isn't about revenge. It's not about exposing them. It's about recognizing the power of your own integrity, and seeing how it shifts the world around you when you walk away. You're not watching their circle fall apart because you wished it. You're watching it because it was always unstable. Your absence simply revealed it. In the next moments, we'll explore 6 piercing truths, each one peeling back a layer of their collapse, each one showing you exactly why your silence was the loudest message you could have ever sent. But stay until the end. Because the last truth isn't about them. It's about you. And it may change the way you see every betrayal going forward. You'll see why your walkaway wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something sacred. Something stronger. Something truly unshakable. Let's dive in. 1. The silent strength that shattered the illusion. They expected something different from you, didn't they? A meltdown maybe. A dramatic plea. Perhaps even a revenge story that validated their narrative of who they needed you to be. But instead, you gave them the one thing they never prepared for: silence. Stoic, composed, deeply rooted silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Not in you, but in them. It's a strange paradox of life. People often fear the loud, but it's the quiet that reveals. And your stillness? That was not an absence of power. It was the full force of it, focused inward, unshaken, and sovereign. Can you feel it now? How their energy began to fracture the moment you withheld yours. How the mask they wore began to feel heavier because there was no longer anyone holding it up with belief, with validation, with trust. This is the untold power of Stoic relationships. They are rooted not in reaction but in observation, and that quiet clarity has a gravity that disrupts entire ecosystems of manipulation. You didn't have to point fingers. You didn't need to tell your side. Because the truth doesn't need defense when it's lived consistently. And here's what most don't understand. When someone builds a false identity, they rely on external reflections to keep it alive. They feed on control, drama, and the chaos of others to distract from the void within. But when you removed your presence, your calm, stabilizing, truth-holding presence, their system began to short-circuit. Why? Because people like that cannot maintain their image without a mirror to project it on. And you were that mirror. Steady. Reflective. Whole. They feared your clarity more than they ever feared confrontation. Because clarity is a quiet destroyer of illusion. It exposes not by accusation, but by contrast. Your silence held up a reflection they couldn't look away from, and they began to unravel under their own gaze. It wasn't immediate. Of course not. These things never are. The collapse of falsehood begins subtly. A friend starts asking questions. A supporter hesitates. The narrative gets harder to maintain. Why? Because your lack of reaction left them exposed to their own inconsistencies. They didn't get to spin your pain into weakness. They didn't get to manipulate your response into justification. You didn't fight their story, you denied them the fuel to keep telling it. And that was the beginning of their fall. It's easy to dismiss noise. It's much harder to dismiss dignity. And dignity in the face of betrayal is a thunder that echoes in silence. What happens when someone who thrives on control no longer has anyone to control? When the games they play meet only quiet boundaries? They turn inward. And that's where the collapse begins, not with drama, but with self-confrontation. You see, Stoicism isn't about indifference. It's about discipline. It's about not being provoked into abandoning your values just because someone else did. And you lived that. You embodied that. While they expected a storm, you became the eye of it, calm, clear, unshaken. That threw them off balance. Their entire strategy relied on your emotional engagement. And when you withheld that, they were left alone with their own choices, their own shadows. Tell me, have you noticed how their tone has changed since? How their justifications have grown more elaborate? How their circle has grown thinner, more strained, more suspicious? That's not coincidence. That's consequence. And you didn't lift a finger. You just stepped away. That is the essence of Stoic relationships. You don't chase, you don't retaliate, you don't perform. You anchor. And once your anchor is removed, every false structure they built begins to drift, destabilize, and eventually collapse. They'll never admit it, not out loud. But inside they know. They feel the shift. They feel the void where your calm used to be. They feel the weight of carrying the stories alone now. And the most ironic part? The longer they try to convince others you were the problem, the more obvious it becomes that they're only trying to convince themselves. This is how illusions dissolve, not with war, but with the quiet erosion of lies under the pressure of truth. And in your restraint you wielded that truth with terrifying precision. You didn't need to yell. You didn't need to fight. You simply stopped. And the absence of your presence became a mirror no one could ignore. That's what shattered the illusion. That's what started the collapse. And that's only the beginning. 2. When trust breaks, everything weakens. Trust is not merely a personal exchange between two people. It's a structural element in the architecture of human connection. So when someone violates it, especially with someone who is genuine, loyal, grounded, it's never just a private act. It's a tremor that shakes the entire foundation of every connection they maintain. And this is the part they never saw coming. They thought they could isolate the damage. That their betrayal of you would somehow stay within the confines of your relationship. That what they did in the shadows would never cast a shadow over their other ties. But reality doesn't work like that. Because character doesn't live in compartments. Who you are with one person inevitably seeps into how you treat everyone else. And once the fracture begins, the pattern reveals itself. Slowly at first. Subtly. But inevitably. What they did to you becomes a signal to others, first subconscious, then visible. People begin to notice inconsistencies. They begin to question their own experiences. They start to remember the offhand comments, the strange shifts in tone, the way this person dodged accountability, or subtly dismissed other people's emotions. Suddenly, their allies aren't so certain. The circle that once clapped for them in blind loyalty starts to hesitate. The ones they rallied against you begin to see that the narrative didn't quite add up. They start wondering, if they could betray someone like that, someone that grounded, that steady, that kind, what's stopping them from doing the same to me? That's the secret betrayal carries. It's never truly buried. It leaves behind a residue. And that residue spreads. It reveals things that words try to hide. Have you ever noticed how quickly people backtrack once they realize the person they defended isn't who they thought they were? That's the crumbling. That's the unraveling of the illusion. Because betrayal isn't just a wound to the person it's inflicted on. It's a declaration of who the betrayer really is. It exposes the cracks in their emotional structure, their relational integrity, their spiritual posture. And in the philosophy of Stoicism, once someone breaks trust, they're not just crossing a boundary, they're revealing a truth. That revelation carries consequences that can't be undone with charm or cleverness. It spreads into their relationships like slow-moving smoke, imperceptible at first, but eventually choking the atmosphere around them. Trust is the oxygen of connection, and now, those around them are struggling to breathe. The ones they leaned on? They're growing weary. Not because you said anything. Not because you exposed them. But because betrayal has a way of making people pay attention in new ways. People who were once distracted by charm begin to listen more closely to tone. People who once dismissed red flags now go back and re-examine every memory through a new lens. And what was once just how they are becomes, wait, is this a pattern? The unraveling is quiet, but powerful. And all the while, you've said nothing. You've simply held your peace. Stoic relationships aren't performative. They aren't reactive. They're resilient. And when someone violates that resilience, the damage ripples, not from you, but from within them. Because here's what they misunderstood: you weren't just another person in their life. You were the one who represented the standard. The one whose loyalty held weight. The one whose integrity gave them credibility by association. When they betrayed you, they didn't just lose your presence. They lost the stabilizer that kept them grounded in the eyes of others. And that loss can't be disguised for long. Because people feel it. They may not know why, but they start to sense it. The person who once seemed so composed now feels frantic. The one who once seemed powerful now feels insecure. They're over-explaining, over-performing, trying too hard to win back a sense of legitimacy. Why? Because your absence is louder than any defense they can make. You are the gravity in their system. Without you, everything feels lighter, and not in the freeing way, but in the unstable, floating away kind of way. And this is where Stoicism becomes your strength. Because instead of reacting, you observed. Instead of retaliating, you held still. And in that stillness, their own behavior began to echo. Their justifications began to crack. Their circle, their friends, their supporters, they all started to feel the shift. Not because you made a scene, but because reality has a way of correcting itself. When someone breaks trust, they introduce instability into every future interaction. And unless they do the deep, painful work of transformation, that instability becomes their default. They may try to outrun it. They may seek new friendships, new alliances, new platforms. But it always follows. Because the source of the problem wasn't you. It was the fact that they chose to betray someone who moved in truth. And that choice became a curse, not one you spoke, but one they invoked through their own actions. Now their conversations are becoming strained. Their interactions carry tension. The room doesn't feel the same when they walk in. Not because people know the full story, but because energy doesn't lie. People sense dissonance. They feel when someone is out of alignment. And as that feeling grows, distance follows. You're not watching their circle collapse because you wished for it. You're watching it collapse because it was never built to last. Their connections were never as solid as they claimed. They were tied together by convenience, control, or image, not by truth. And truth always wins. Eventually. That's the gift and the curse of reality. It never forgets. And while they scramble to hold on to appearances, more cracks begin to show. People they counted on grow cold. Invitations stop. Support fades. The warmth that once followed them into every room now stays behind. They're beginning to realize that credibility can't be faked, not long term. And that trust, once broken, takes everything with it. You didn't have to do anything but walk away. You didn't need to explain. You didn't need to prove a thing. You just stood in your worth, and let the storm they created follow them, not you. And that, more than any reaction, is what made the truth visible to others. Because here's what Stoic relationships do. They hold a quiet line that cannot be crossed without consequence. Not because you retaliate, but because your integrity triggers reality into motion. If you're watching this and you've experienced the slow collapse of someone else's circle after they betrayed you, understand this. It's not your doing, but it is your confirmation. Confirmation that your silence held power. That your walkaway was the pivot point between illusion and revelation. And if this resonates with you, if you've seen the shift, if you've lived through the silence, and now you're watching the unraveling, like this video and comment, number 1, below. Your story matters. Your clarity matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more grounded truth like this. Because Stoicism isn't just an ancient philosophy. It's a modern strength. And you, my friend, are living proof. 3. The collapse begins from within. It's easy to assume that when a person's world starts falling apart, it's because of some external force, an exposure, a confrontation, a dramatic reckoning. But in most cases, the true collapse is internal, and it begins long before anyone else notices. When someone betrays another person who stood for truth, who carried integrity, who lived according to principles, they think they're winning in the moment. They might even feel stronger, more in control. But that feeling is a false high. What they don't realize is that their act of betrayal isn't just a statement about how they see you. It's a revelation about how little they know themselves. And when someone is that disconnected from their own inner world, from their own values, that disconnect becomes a slow but inevitable unraveling. In Stoic relationships, the moment of betrayal is not an explosion, it's a quiet shift, like the first crack in the ice. The surface still looks solid for a while, but the integrity underneath is already compromised. It doesn't take much more for the whole thing to break apart. And that's exactly what starts happening. Slowly, from within. They begin to feel it. First, in their restlessness. In the guilt they try to deny. In the confusion that creeps in when things don't flow like they used to. The manipulation that once felt effortless becomes harder to maintain. The control they used to wield with ease begins to feel like desperation. They try harder. They press more. They perform louder. But none of it feels natural anymore. Because now, something inside them knows. Knows that the foundation isn't steady. That something has shifted. And this is the hidden power of Stoicism. It teaches us that we don't need to fight every battle in the external world. When we hold our truth, reality aligns itself in time. The one who betrays you walks away thinking you've lost. But what they've actually done is trigger their own disintegration. They severed the last thread of connection to something real. And that severing sends ripples through their entire emotional ecosystem. It starts to affect how they see themselves. They lose clarity. They start second-guessing. Their inner voice, once muted, starts asking questions they don't want to answer. Did I go too far? Was that fair? Why did I do that to someone who cared? They try to bury these thoughts under distractions, validation, denial. But the questions don't stop. They echo in quiet moments. And over time, those echoes get louder. Their thoughts become clouded. Their energy shifts. Have you noticed how someone who once seemed so magnetic now feels off? That's not your perception distorting. That's their own inner chaos becoming visible. Because when someone violates their own moral compass, when they choose ego over growth, deceit over truth, convenience over character, they begin to rot from the inside. And that rot, at first invisible, begins to show up in everything. Their conversations carry tension. Their eyes avoid truth. Their energy feels scattered. They may still speak with confidence, but something in their voice lacks conviction. They may still smile, but it no longer reaches their soul. And this is the most tragic part. They don't even know what they're losing. Because when you betray someone who brought clarity into your life, you lose your compass. You lose your mirror. You lose the very thing that could have guided you toward a higher version of yourself. In Stoic relationships, people grow not through force but through reflection. And when someone removes that mirror, they lose the chance to evolve. Instead, they regress. They start relying on old patterns, old habits, old defenses. But now, those patterns don't work. Why? Because your absence has changed the environment. It's exposed what they've been hiding, even from themselves. You were the stabilizer. The one who saw them clearly but didn't condemn. The one who challenged them silently by simply being consistent. And without that grounding, they begin to spiral. But here's the key: the spiral doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like ambition, like forced happiness, like curated success. But beneath the surface, the pressure is building. Because they're no longer in alignment with truth. They're no longer anchored in anything real. And no matter how much they try to pretend, that disconnection starts leaking into every interaction. Others start to feel it. They may not know why, but they begin to pull back. They stop trusting. They stop opening up. They don't feel safe anymore, not because of something obvious, but because of something felt. People can sense when someone isn't living in truth. And slowly, subtly, that internal instability starts changing their external world. Opportunities slip away. Support grows cold. Loyalty fades. Not because of sabotage, but because the energy they carry now repels the very things they once attracted. That's the collapse from within. And here's the beautiful irony: you didn't have to do a thing. You didn't need to expose them. You didn't need to seek revenge. You just stood still in your integrity. And that stillness, that unwavering truth, began to mirror their deception back to them. At first, they resented it. Then they denied it. But now, they're starting to feel it. They feel the gap. The one between who they appear to be and who they actually are. And that gap is growing. It haunts them. It follows them. It taints every new connection, every new beginning. Because when you haven't made peace with your own actions, you can't escape them. You carry them into every space you enter. Stoicism teaches us that peace comes not from avoidance, but from alignment. And when someone betrays that alignment, their inner world begins to fracture. It doesn't matter how strong they seem. It doesn't matter how loud they speak. When a person is living in contradiction to their core, it shows. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Because your inner world always becomes your outer world. You can't hide from it forever. And now, they're beginning to see that. They're starting to experience the dissonance they once tried to silence. And the more they try to escape it, the louder it becomes. Every relationship they enter feels harder. Every friendship carries more tension. Every success feels emptier. Because they know, deep down, that they burned a bridge they never should have touched. That they betrayed someone who would have stood by them, not out of weakness, but out of loyalty. Out of strength. Out of clarity. And that loss? That's not something you can replace. You don't find another person like that easily. Someone who brings presence instead of performance. Someone who sees through the chaos but chooses peace anyway. Someone who embodies stoicism. Not as a mask, but as a way of life. And now, in your absence, they are feeling the weight of everything they lost. Their world is still spinning. They're still functioning. But the foundation is cracked. The clarity is gone. The inner collapse has begun. And while it may take time for the full structure to fall, the process has already started. You didn't cause it. But you were the catalyst. Not because you fought back, but because you chose yourself. Because you chose truth. Because you walked away without needing to explain. And in doing so, you exposed everything they thought they had hidden. This is the true cost of betrayal, not just the loss of someone's presence, but the unraveling of one's own soul. And once that begins, no amount of performance can stop it. The collapse has already begun. 4. Reputation cannot survive where character fails. They wanted to believe they were untouchable. That no matter what they did, no matter how they moved, how they twisted the truth, or painted the narrative, their image would remain intact. That their charm could outpace consequence, that their connections could cover their cracks. But reality doesn't bend forever, and reputation, without character, becomes nothing more than a hollow echo. In Stoic relationships, the value of a person is not found in what they project, but in what they practice. And when someone repeatedly shows that their words don't align with their actions, when they break trust not once but as a pattern, when they live in contradiction while pretending to uphold virtue, their reputation begins to decay, not from outside attacks, but from within. It's a slow erosion, the kind that you can't see until it starts collapsing everything built upon it. You see, character is the silent foundation of every connection. It's the unspoken element that makes people feel safe in your presence. It's why people open up, why they invest, why they stay. And when someone's actions betray their words, that sense of safety dies. Quietly. Irrevocably. At first, people may try to explain it away. They're going through something. They didn't mean it. They're just misunderstood. But time peels away all excuses. Time reveals patterns. And when people start noticing the same behavior again and again, avoidance of accountability, rewriting of past events, manipulation masked as charm, trust begins to corrode. Not just between you and them, but between them and everyone else. Because betrayal doesn't live in isolation. It exposes the fragility of a person's moral compass. And when a compass is broken, every direction they move in feels off to those around them. Even if they don't say it out loud, people begin to hesitate. Conversations become more guarded. Questions start to surface. Why do they always seem to have drama around them? Why does every story make them the victim? Why do their friendships never last? The answers aren't spoken immediately, but they're felt. And that feeling begins to spread through their circle. That's when the unraveling speeds up. Because in Stoicism, we learn that nothing unstable can remain hidden forever. The gap between who someone pretends to be and who they really are will always widen until it breaks through. And once it does, there's no going back. The person they pretended to be starts to disintegrate. People stop responding the same way. The warmth fades. The admiration grows cold. The credibility they relied on is gone. Why? Because people don't trust charisma that comes with contradiction. They don't stay loyal to those who make loyalty feel dangerous. And that's what happens when you betray someone who represented truth. Your own truth becomes compromised. Slowly, your words begin to carry less weight. Your intentions get questioned. Your alliances lose their strength. Not because anyone attacked you, but because your character failed to hold. You may still have followers, still have people nodding along, but their belief is thinner now. Their trust is conditional. They're watching more closely, looking for signs. Because you taught them to. Your actions set the tone. Your betrayal laid the groundwork. And now, the doubt you planted is growing into full-blown suspicion. This is how reputations collapse. Not all at once, but piece by piece. From the inside out. And here's the part that stings most for those who thought they were immune to consequence. They can't stop it. Because no matter how much they try to regain control, the narrative is no longer in their hands. People don't believe words anymore. They believe patterns. They believe energy. They believe lived experience. And the pattern is clear now. You weren't the anomaly. You were the alarm. You weren't the exception. You were the exposure. And once someone's character fails in front of the one person who held them to a higher standard, they begin to realize just how fragile their influence was. It wasn't built on substance. It was built on curation, on carefully managed impressions, on borrowed credibility. And now that it's gone, now that you've stepped back and let your absence speak, they are exposed to a silence that can't be spun. Stoicism teaches us not to depend on reputation, but to cultivate character. Because reputation is a reflection, but character is the source. And when the source is compromised, the reflection distorts. That distortion is what people around them are starting to notice. They may still pretend, still post, still smile. But behind the performance, the collapse has already taken root. And it will spread. Because without integrity, no reputation survives. And if this resonates with you, if you're watching someone's image unravel while you remain quiet but clear, like this video and comment, number 1, below. Your story matters. Your experience matters. And if you want more clarity like this, make sure to subscribe, because Stoicism isn't just ancient wisdom, it's a blueprint for navigating betrayal with honor. And you, by choosing truth over drama, are already ahead. 5. The void you left reveals their dependency. They didn't realize it at the time, few ever do, but your presence wasn't just another connection in their life. It was the grounding force they leaned on more than they knew. While they were busy performing, projecting, manipulating outcomes and alliances, you were providing something rare: emotional stability, moral structure, and silent strength. And when they betrayed you, they didn't just sever a relationship, they removed the very presence that was keeping their chaos in check. You weren't loud, you weren't forceful, but your energy stabilized rooms, clarified tension, soothed friction, and anchored dynamics. That's the hidden truth about Stoic relationships. The people who seem most replaceable are often the most irreplaceable, because they bring what cannot be replicated: character, presence, a soul that doesn't shift with the wind. And when someone loses that, when they betray the one who brought that into their lives, they discover something far more uncomfortable than regret. They discover disorientation. Because once you're gone, once your voice, your peace, your clarity, your patience is no longer part of the equation, everything else begins to tilt. You were the compass they ignored. You were the steady frequency that helped others in the circle navigate the chaos they caused without even knowing it. And now, with you gone, everyone feels it. Conversations are more tense. Interactions are more performative. People talk, but nothing is said. The harmony is gone, the glue evaporated. And the one person who could have held it together? You. But you walked. Not to punish. Not to manipulate. But because your value system wouldn't let you stay where you weren't respected. Because your truth had no room to breathe in an environment laced with deceit. They didn't see it then. They thought your absence would be a relief. They mistook your silence for surrender. But what they got wasn't freedom, it was exposure. Because your absence created a vacuum. And vacuums are loud. They echo. They pull at the edges of everyone who remains, exposing what was always fragile but hidden beneath your quiet strength. The dysfunction they kept hidden suddenly became undeniable. Not because something new appeared, but because the one person absorbing it was no longer there to act as the buffer. You took the tension with you. You took the patience, the clarity, the boundaries. And what's left? A raw, exposed system that doesn't know how to regulate itself. Now their circle feels different. People are uncertain. Emotional energy is off. Those who used to side with them now start to question. Even if they don't say it aloud, they're thinking it. Things felt better when you were here. And that thought alone begins to reshape how they perceive the person who betrayed you. Slowly, the illusion cracks. Because when someone who brought peace leaves, chaos doesn't just emerge, it rushes in. And chaos reveals everything. Every crack, every lie, every weak tie dressed up as loyalty. It all becomes visible. And here's what they never prepared for: they depended on you more than they depended on themselves. They leaned on your presence to regulate their identity, to borrow your dignity, to soften the harshness of their own energy. And now, without you, they feel it. Not in a flash, but in fragments. A conversation that ends too abruptly. A friend who stops texting. A confidant who suddenly pulls back. They look around and realize the relationships they thought were strong are barely holding on. And they wonder why. They wonder what changed. But the answer is simple: you're gone. And the absence of your energy is dismantling the false reality they built. This is what Stoicism protects you from: being entangled in the lies others tell themselves. By stepping away, by choosing peace over performance, by holding your line in silence, you created space for truth to rise. Not forced truth. Organic truth. The kind of truth that emerges when people feel the difference between chaos and order, between manipulation and clarity, between presence and absence. That's the void you left. It's not a punishment. It's a mirror. And they can't escape it. Because no matter how much they pretend, no matter how many new people they bring into their life, the energy never feels the same. You were the anchor. You were the one who didn't need to dominate to be felt. You didn't need to control to be powerful. And that kind of energy leaves a signature. Once it's gone, everything else feels counterfeit. And they know it. Maybe not at first. Maybe not publicly. But in those quiet moments, when they scroll through old messages, when they replay old conversations, when they notice how flat things feel without you, they know. They feel the gap. And it bothers them. It agitates their spirit. Because people who once relied on your calm now have to confront their own instability. People who thrived on your validation now have to face their own emptiness. And those who took your loyalty for granted now sit in circles where loyalty is shallow and conditional. That's the cost of betrayal. Not loud consequences, but slow decay. And the more they try to fill the void, the more apparent it becomes that it can't be filled. Because the presence you brought wasn't surface level. It was soul level. And once someone betrays that, they forfeit the peace that comes with it. They can seek comfort elsewhere. They can create new narratives. But the void remains. And every time they feel it, they're reminded, not of your pain, but of your power. Because you didn't collapse. You didn't come undone. You rose. You refined. You chose clarity. And in doing so, you taught them something they weren't ready to learn, that dependency isn't always obvious. Sometimes, it's hidden beneath arrogance, denial, even mockery. But once the source of peace is gone, the truth comes rushing in. And no matter how far they run, no matter what stories they tell, they will always carry that truth with them. You were never the weak one. You were the one holding everything steady. And now, without your stabilizing force, the imbalance is undeniable. The void is loud. The absence is heavy. And the unraveling is real. 6. The mirror has turned on them. It started the moment you walked away, not with a bang, not with a dramatic exit, but with the unmistakable stillness that only comes from deep understanding. You weren't reacting anymore. You were reflecting. And what they didn't realize at the time was that your silence wasn't just a boundary, it was a mirror. It showed them something they had spent their lives avoiding, the truth about who they are when no one's left to blame. Because you didn't leave with bitterness. You didn't spread rumors. You didn't seek validation. You simply stopped showing up. And in that void, the silence began to speak. Stoicism teaches us that the highest power is not in what we say, but in how we live. You lived with honor, even when they didn't. You stayed grounded when they tried to unbalance you. And now, without your presence to project onto, they are left with only themselves. This is the moment they feared the most. Because you weren't just a person in their life, you were their reflection point. The one who challenged them by simply existing. The one who never needed to say, "I'm better," because your actions said it all. And now that you're gone, they can't escape what you revealed. Their own patterns, once masked by your willingness to see the best in them, are now exposed. There's no one to buffer their extremes. No one to filter their contradictions. And people are starting to notice. Not because you spoke, but because they can't stop speaking. They over-explain, overshare, over-defend. They try to control the narrative because they know they're losing control of perception. That's what happens when you remove truth from the room. The lies begin to crumble under their own weight. People who once saw them as strong now see them as insecure. People who once believed their story are starting to ask new questions. And every answer they give sounds more desperate than the last. It's not because others want to turn against them, it's because energy doesn't lie. And when someone is living in contradiction, it leaks out. The tone changes. The story shifts. The weight of their unresolved guilt becomes visible in how they carry themselves. They can't sleep the same. Can't think the same. Because they're constantly managing an illusion that was never sustainable. And now that you've exited their world, the illusion is collapsing. Not because you pulled it apart, but because your absence removed the balance that kept it barely standing. And here's the part they didn't count on. They're not just being exposed. They're being transformed painfully by their own dysfunction. Every person who now questions them was once protected by your presence. Every breakdown in their circle is a result of the imbalance you used to absorb. You see, Stoic relationships aren't reactive, they're regulatory. They keep things grounded simply by being centered. And when someone removes that center, they don't realize how fragile their circle really is. It begins to break. Not by attack, but by truth. You were never their enemy. You were the mirror. And now, the mirror they once tried to destroy is showing up in every broken friendship, every failed connection, every room that no longer welcomes them. Because betrayal isn't just about what you do to someone, it's about what you awaken in yourself. And what they've awakened is unraveling them. Slowly. Irrevocably. They may try to replace you. They may try to find new mirrors, new people to validate the identity they're clinging to. But none of it fits. Because those connections are built on performance, not presence. They are shallow, conditional, transactional. And when someone is addicted to control, to manipulation, to image, they cannot form real bonds. They can only form alliances of convenience. But convenience doesn't comfort the soul. It doesn't replace depth. It doesn't quiet the voice inside that whispers, "You lost something real." That voice is louder now. Not because you're saying anything, but because your absence is. And that voice will keep echoing in every moment of silence they try to drown with distraction. This is what happens when you walk away in truth. You don't just remove yourself, you reveal everything. Their entire world is now a reflection of what they once tried to hide. It's not karma punishing them, it's awareness illuminating them. And awareness is relentless. It doesn't let you pretend once you've seen too much. It doesn't let you go back to who you were. And for them, the pain isn't just the loss of you, it's the realization that they're still stuck in a version of themselves they can no longer respect. You were the one person who gave them a chance to be better. Not because you forced it, but because you lived it. Your life, your choices, your presence challenged their facade. And instead of rising to meet you, they betrayed you. Not because you were weak, but because you reminded them they weren't ready. And now that reminder is all they have. It's in the broken connections, in the strained conversations, in the awkward silences. You weren't the problem. You were the presence that made the problem visible. And now, without you, the mirror has turned on them. They are being forced to see what they ran from, themselves. And if this speaks to you, if you've felt this truth, if you've watched the same people who betrayed you begin to fall apart without your presence, like this video and comment, number 1, below. And if you want to keep walking in truth with clarity and courage, subscribe now. Because Stoicism isn't about being unaffected, it's about being unshakable. And if you've lived through this, you already are. You didn't just survive what they did to you, you transformed through it. And the most powerful part, you didn't become someone else to do it. You didn't morph into bitterness, you didn't retaliate with venom, you didn't seek validation in proving them wrong. You remained grounded in your values, anchored in your silence, strengthened by your decision to walk away without spectacle. That is the essence of Stoicism. It teaches us that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. And you chose the response that requires the most courage, stillness. You chose clarity over chaos, integrity over reaction, peace over performance. And in that decision, you initiated a chain of events that neither you nor they could reverse. Their world isn't falling apart because you made it fall. It's falling apart because it was never built on anything solid. It relied on your loyalty to stabilize what they refused to face. It depended on your emotional labor to mask the dysfunction they never addressed. It needed your presence to maintain the illusion that they were whole. And now that you've stepped back, what's left is a mirror they cannot look away from. The unraveling you're witnessing is not vengeance, it's revelation. It's the natural order correcting itself. Because when someone betrays truth, they sever themselves from the very thing that nourishes the soul. And when the soul begins to deteriorate, so does everything built around it. Their relationships, once vibrant, now feel transactional. Their conversations, once lively, now feel strained. Their smiles, once convincing, now feel hollow. They didn't lose you the moment you walked away, they lost you the moment they chose betrayal over honesty. And that moment marked the beginning of a slow collapse they mistook for freedom. You were never trying to control them. You were never trying to punish them. You were simply trying to walk in truth. And when that truth became too uncomfortable for them to stand next to, they attacked it. But Stoicism reminds us that we don't need to fight what's beneath us. We only need to walk in alignment with our principles and let time do what it always does, reveal. You are not the villain in their story. You are the chapter they can't rewrite. You are the turning point that cannot be framed. Because while they were busy curating an image, you were living a reality. And now that reality is speaking louder than anything they can manufacture. You've learned something precious from all this, that your peace is your power, that your silence holds weight, and that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You didn't need them to break to feel whole. You just needed to stop holding the weight of what wasn't yours. And the moment you did, everything became clear. Their circle fell apart not because you exposed them, but because you removed the structure that was holding everything together. Your presence was the axis. And when that axis is gone, the spin becomes disoriented. You were not just a person in their life, you were the proof of something real. Something stable. Something deeply rare. And that loss isn't something they can replace. It will echo in every new relationship, every new alliance, every room they walk into trying to recreate what you provided freely. Because Stoic relationships are built on presence, not performance. On truth, not tactics. And that kind of connection doesn't appear twice for someone who throws it away. The lessons you've gained from this can never be taken from you. You now know how to see beneath the surface. How to recognize when someone depends on your goodness without honoring it. How to spot the signs of dependency masked as dominance, and insecurity dressed up as control. You no longer carry the need to convince anyone of your worth. Your peace has become evidence. Your calm has become your voice. And that voice, though quiet, echoes louder than any scream. The people who truly know you see it. They feel it in your energy. They trust it in your walk. And even those who once doubted you are starting to question the stories they were told. Not because you said a word, but because your life continues to speak. The ripple of your dignity reaches farther than you'll ever know. And those who once celebrated your silence now feel its absence. This is your reminder, never underestimate the power of stillness. Never doubt the strength of a clean heart. And never let someone else's disorder make you question the value of your peace. They lost you because they betrayed what was real. You rose because you honored what was true. And now, while they sit in the ruins of everything built on ego, you are building something unshakable, yourself. No applause needed. No explanations given. Just the quiet, steady unfolding of a life lived in truth. And that truth? That is your legacy. That is your justice. That is your freedom. Keep walking.